The silence stretched across the Afghan valley like a held breath, broken only by the distant thrum of rotor blades cutting through thin mountain air. Lieutenant Commander Marcus, Bulldog, Reeves pressed his eye to the scope, watching the compound below through thermal imaging that painted the world in ghostly greens and yellows. 6 Taliban fighters moved between the buildings, their heat signatures pulsing like dying embers against the cold stone walls. "Overwatch, this is Reaper 6, his voice crackled through the radio, barely above a whisper. "We've got movement in the compound. Request immediate backup." The response came through static and distance. "Reaper 6, Overwatch. No assets available for immediate support. You are weapons free to engage." Bulldog's jaw tightened. 12 hours ago, intelligence had painted this as a simple extraction mission. A downed pilot, call sign unknown, somewhere in this godforsaken valley. Now his 8-man SEAL team was pinned down in a dried riverbed, surrounded by fighters who seemed to know exactly where they'd be coming from. The mission had gone sideways the moment they'd fast-roped from the Black Hawks, and the feeling in his gut told him this was bigger than anyone had anticipated. "Contact left." Petty Officer Jake Torino's voice exploded across the comm as muzzle flashes erupted from behind a stone wall 200 meters up the slope. The distinctive crack of AK-47s echoed off the canyon walls, followed by the deeper bark of PKM machine guns. Brass casings tinkled against rocks as the SEALs returned fire from whatever cover they could find. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions," Bulldog shouted into his radio, trying to be heard over the chaos. "They've got us bracketed in a kill zone." The truth was becoming horrifyingly clear. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. They were the ones who needed rescuing. Intelligence had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. Instead of finding a lone survivor, they'd walked straight into a trap that had been set with military precision. Someone had known they were coming, known their route, known their timing. A rocket-propelled grenade screamed overhead, impacting against the far canyon wall in a shower of stone and smoke. The concussion wave pressed against their bodies like an invisible hand. Bulldog counted muzzle flashes, at least 30 fighters, maybe more, positioned in a perfect L-shaped ambush that covered every possible escape route. "Lord, save us," whispered Torino, pressing himself deeper into the meager cover of a boulder as bullets whined overhead like angry hornets. In the distance, beyond the immediate chaos of the firefight, something moved on the high ridge overlooking the valley. Something that shouldn't have been there, something that intelligence had never mentioned. But in the confusion and terror of the moment, nobody noticed the lone figure settling into position 800 meters away, finger finding the trigger of a rifle that had been waiting in silence for exactly this moment. The battle for their lives was about to take a turn nobody could have anticipated, least of all the woman who had been watching from the shadows for 3 days, waiting for the perfect shot. Captain Raven Ghost, Macready adjusted her scope one final click, exhaled slowly, and began to change the course of history with surgical precision. But first, she had to watch good men die while she calculated angles and wind drift, because that was the price of being the weapon nobody knew existed. The SEAL team below had no idea their salvation lay in the hands of a pilot they'd written off as dead 72 hours ago. A woman whose service record had more black ink than readable text, whose very existence was classified at levels most of these men had never heard of. They were about to learn that sometimes guardian angels came with sniper rifles and kill counts that would make seasoned operators lose sleep. But for now, in this moment suspended between heartbeats, all they knew was that they were trapped, outgunned, and running out of ammunition in a valley that might as well have been the surface of Mars for all the help they could expect. The radio crackled with desperate calls for support that would never come, while above them, Ghost Macready made peace with what she was about to unleash. The first shot would be the hardest. After that, it was just mathematics and muscle memory, the same deadly calculus she'd been perfecting since she was old enough to hold a rifle steady. The same skills that had gotten her shot down in the first place, when her FA-18 Super Hornet had taken a surface-to-air missile while providing close air support for a convoy that turned out to be bait in a larger trap. She'd ejected at 15,000 feet, landed hard in terrain that maps couldn't adequately describe, and spent 3 days evading capture while making her way to higher ground. Now, watching through her scope as Taliban fighters moved with practiced efficiency to finish off the SEAL team, she realized that everything had led to this moment. The scope's crosshairs settled on the machine gunner who was pouring devastating fire into the SEAL's position from behind a concrete barrier. He was young, maybe 19, with careful hands and good instincts. In another life, in another war, he might have been someone she'd have been proud to train. "Forgive me," she whispered to the mountain wind, and squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she'd used to stroke a lover's cheek. The .338 Lapua Magnum round traveled 847 meters in 1.2 seconds, dropping the machine gunner before the sound of the shot reached the compound. The sudden silence from his position was like a missing note in a deadly symphony, noticed immediately by both sides of the engagement. "What the hell?" Bulldog's voice carried confusion and hope in equal measure as he watched fighters scramble to replace their fallen comrade. "Did anyone see where that came from?" Ghost was already working the bolt, chambering another round while tracking her next target through the scope. A spotter with a radio, coordinates flowing from his lips to whoever was calling in the mortar fire that would end this fight permanently. He was partially concealed behind a rock outcropping, but she had an angle on his shoulder and part of his head. The second shot dropped him mid-sentence, his radio falling silent just as he was calling for fire missions that would have turned the SEALs into memories and regret. By now, the fighters in the compound knew they had a problem, but they couldn't identify the source. The shots were coming from too far away, from an angle they hadn't thought to watch. "Reaper 6, this is unknown station." Ghost's voice came through clearly on the SEAL's frequency, modulated by equipment that shouldn't have existed in this theater. "You've got support on the ridge. Keep your heads down and let me work." Bulldog's head snapped up at the voice, definitely American, definitely female, and speaking with the kind of calm professionalism that came from someone who'd done this dance before. "Unknown station. Identify yourself. How did you get on our frequency?" "Call sign Ghost. I'm the pilot you came looking for, and right now I'm your best friend in the world. Third shot coming up on the RPG team at your 2 o'clock. When he goes down, move left toward the cluster of boulders." The third shot eliminated the rocket-propelled grenade operator just as he was sighting in on the SEAL's position, his weapon falling useless beside his still form. True to her word, Ghost had given them the opening they needed to advance to better cover, and Bulldog was smart enough not to waste it. "Move, move, move," he shouted, and 8 highly trained special operations warriors bounded toward the boulder field with the fluid precision of men who'd done this 1,000 times before. Behind them, Ghost's fourth shot dropped a sniper who'd been lining up on their retreat, her bullet taking him before he could complete his own trigger squeeze. "Ghost, how many rounds you got up there?" Bulldog's voice carried new respect as his team settled into their improved position. "Enough," came the terse reply, followed immediately by the crack of her fifth shot echoing off the canyon walls. Another fighter fell, this one trying to flank their position from the north side of the compound. "But we need to end this fast. I count at least 20 more in the compound, and they're calling for reinforcements." The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The pilot they'd come to rescue was now rescuing them, and doing it with a precision that spoke of training far beyond what any normal aviator would have received. But there wasn't time for questions, not when every passing second brought more danger. Ghost's sixth shot took out a communications specialist who was frantically working a field radio, trying to coordinate with other Taliban cells in the area. The man's equipment sparked and died with him, buying them precious minutes before reinforcements could arrive. Through her scope, she could see the remaining fighters beginning to lose their coordination, their carefully planned ambush dissolving into confused defensive positions. "I'm moving to a new position," Ghost announced over the radio. "Give me 60 seconds, then advance on my signal. I'll suppress from the East Ridge." "Negative, Ghost," Bulldog responded immediately. "You maintain overwatch. We'll handle the ground assault." "With respect, Commander, I've been watching these guys for 3 days. I know their patterns, their positions, their escape routes. Trust me on this one." There was something in her voice that brooked no argument, a confidence that came from intimate knowledge of the battlefield. Bulldog had been in enough firefights to recognize the voice of someone who had already won the tactical problem in their head and was now just executing the solution. "Roger, Ghost will follow your lead." Through her scope, she watched the SEALs settle into firing positions, their movements economical and professional. These were good men, the kind of warriors she'd spent her career supporting from 30,000 feet and 500 knots. Now she was supporting them with single, carefully placed shots that each carried the weight of tactical necessity. Her seventh shot dropped a fighter who was attempting to set up a new machine gun position, the weapon clattering uselessly down the slope as his hands released it forever. The remaining Taliban fighters were becoming increasingly desperate, their disciplined ambush deteriorating into scattered defensive positions that made them vulnerable to her elevated firing position. "Ghost, this is Reaper 6, Bulldog's voice carried a tone she'd heard before, the respect that came when professionals recognized other professionals. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" "Long story, Commander. Let's finish this fight first, then I'll buy you a beer and tell you all about it." The eighth shot eliminated the last effective heavy weapons position, leaving the remaining fighters with only small arms and their knowledge of the local terrain. It was still dangerous, but the balance of the engagement had shifted decisively in favor of the SEALs. Ghost had turned a potential massacre into a manageable tactical problem. "All stations, this is Ghost, moving to final position. When you see my signal, advance in fire teams. I'll be watching your flanks." She was already moving as she spoke, her ghillie suit blending seamlessly with the rocky terrain as she bounded between covered positions with movements that would have impressed a mountain goat. 3 days of evading, capture had taught her every fold and crevice of this landscape, and now she was using that knowledge to position herself for the final phase of the engagement. The ninth shot came from her new position, dropping a Taliban commander who was trying to rally his remaining fighters for a coordinated retreat. Without his leadership, the defense began to collapse entirely, individual fighters making independent decisions that left them exposed to both Ghost's rifle and the SEAL's assault. "Execute, execute, execute," Ghost's voice commanded, and the SEAL team rose from their positions like avenging spirits, advancing with practiced efficiency across terrain they'd studied through binoculars for the past 20 minutes. Each man knew his sector, his responsibilities, his brother's positions. They moved like parts of a single organism dedicated to controlled violence. Ghost's 10th shot covered their advance, dropping a fighter who attempted to establish an enfilade position that would have caught the SEALs in a crossfire. Her 11th shot eliminated a sniper who was drawing a bead on Petty Officer Torino as he bounded between covered positions. By now, the remaining Taliban fighters were in full retreat, abandoning their prepared positions in favor of escape routes that led deeper into the mountains. "Reaper 6, compound secure," Bulldog announced as his team finished clearing the last building. 11 enemy KIA, no friendly casualties. "Ghost, that was some of the finest shooting I've ever witnessed." "Thank you, Commander. I'm moving to your position now. We need to get out of here before those reinforcements arrive." She was already descending from her sniper's hide, moving with the careful haste of someone who knew that victory in one engagement didn't guarantee survival in the larger battle. Her equipment was packed with military efficiency, rifle broken down, scope protected, ammunition accounted for. 3 days of living rough had taught her to value every ounce of gear she carried. The descent took her 15 minutes, navigating terrain that would have challenged experienced climbers while carrying 40 pounds of equipment. When she finally stepped into the compound, the SEALs got their first good look at the woman who had saved their lives with surgical precision from 800 meters away. Captain Raven Macready was not what they'd expected. Smaller than most of them, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her surroundings with automatic precision. Her flight suit was torn and stained from 3 days in the mountains, but her bearing was unmistakably military, unmistakably competent. "Captain Macready," she said simply, offering her hand to Bulldog with the same calm professionalism she displayed over the radio. "Thanks for coming to get me, even though it turned out I was the one doing the getting." "Commander Reeves," he replied, studying her with new eyes. "Ma'am, I have to ask, where did a Navy pilot learn to shoot like that?" She smiled, and for the first time since the engagement began, she looked like someone who might laugh at a good joke or cry at a sad movie. "Before I was a pilot, Commander, I was a lot of other things. Some of them are in my service record and some of them, well, some of them are why my service record has more black ink than most people have ever seen." "And the call sign Ghost?" Torino asked, unable to keep the curiosity out of his voice. "That's what happens when you're good at being places people don't expect, doing things people don't think are possible." She checked her watch, a practical military timepiece that had somehow survived her ejection and 3 days of mountain warfare. "We need to move. Intelligence suggests there are at least 50 more fighters heading this way, and they'll be here within the hour." Bulldog nodded, already mentally calculating routes and timing. "What's the extraction plan? Our original LZ is compromised." "There's a clearing about 2 clicks north of here, defensible position with good approaches for the helicopters. I've been watching it for 3 days, it's clean." She shouldered her pack with movements that spoke of long practice. "I can guide us there, but we need to move fast and quiet." "Lead the way, Ghost. You've earned the right to call the shots." As they prepared to move out, Bulldog couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Captain Raven Macready than her personnel file would ever reveal. The precision of her shooting, the way she'd known their radio frequencies, her intimate knowledge of the terrain, these weren't the skills of a typical naval aviator, no matter how good. But questions would have to wait. For now, she was their guide through hostile territory, and her proven competence was all the credentials she needed. They formed up in standard patrol formation, with Ghost taking point and leading them through terrain she'd memorized during 3 days of careful observation. The march to the extraction point would take them through 2 hours of dangerous country, past positions where enemy fighters might be waiting in ambush. But somehow, with Ghost leading the way and her rifle ready to reach out and touch anyone who threatened them, Bulldog felt more confident than he had since the mission began. Behind them, the compound stood silent except for the wind whistling through bullet holes in stone walls. 11 Taliban fighters would never threaten American forces again, taken down by a woman who had turned a desperate situation into a tactical masterpiece with nothing but skill, patience, and a rifle that sang deadly songs across mountain valleys. The legend of Ghost Macready was just beginning, though none of them knew it yet. They were too focused on staying alive, on reaching the extraction point, on getting home to write reports that would struggle to capture the reality of what they'd witnessed. But in the years to come, when old warriors gathered to tell stories of impossible shots and miraculous saves, they would speak of a day in an Afghan valley when death came calling, and a ghost answered back with precision fire and unwavering courage. The mountain wind carried their footsteps away as they disappeared into the maze of ridges and valleys that had hidden armies and swallowed empires. Somewhere behind them, reinforcements were rushing toward a compound that no longer held any tactical value, while ahead of them, rescue helicopters were spinning up for a mission that would bring them all home. Ghost Macready checked her 6-1 final time, making sure they weren't being followed, then settled into the rhythm of the march. She was going home, finally, after 3 days that had felt like 3 years. But she was carrying more than just her equipment and her rifle. She was carrying the knowledge that when everything had gone wrong, when good men had faced certain death, she'd been in exactly the right place with exactly the right skills to make a difference. It was, she reflected as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of Scree Slope, exactly why she joined the military in the first place. Not for the glory or the recognition, but for moments like this when training and courage intersected with desperate necessity. When the only thing standing between good people and disaster was competence, dedication, and the willingness to pull a trigger when pulling that trigger meant the difference between life and death. The extraction LZ lay ahead, and with it, the end of a mission that had started as a rescue and ended as something else entirely. But that was a story for another day, for debriefing rooms and after-action reports. For now, it was enough to put one foot in front of the other, to watch for threats, and to guide her new brothers-in-arms towards safety and home.